punchline is this: the Antichrist will go into the temple of God, but God is going to set it up so that he actually goes in. God is going to abandon his temple. God has a history of abandoning his temples. Okay, this is nothing new. And we're going to talk about how God and when God abandons his temples, the circumstances of abandonment, what this looks like when God abandons a temple. And we're also going to look at temple dedications. They're connected, a dedication of a temple and the abandonment of a temple. We need to look at both of those because both of those will play out in the end times. The whole Bible is really a temple story. It's how God is king over the universe and he has kings underneath him to rule the world. And we're looking at the kind of kingdom that was in the ancient days where the king was also God or represented God. So every temple is actually a court, a throne room. The whole book of Revelation is actually, it's a temple story. It's a king in his throne room temple story. And temple stories have been acted and reenacted over and over and over again throughout the Bible. We're going to take a look at those in just a minute. But I'm going to give you the punchline one more time. God is going to have a temple that's erected by the two witnesses, who are the two olive trees and the two lampstands. Take us back to Zechariah chapter 4 with Zerubbabel, who was the person who set up and was responsible for the building of the second temple after the Babylonian captivity. So we attach temple building with the two witnesses. That's how we do it right there. I have a whole 65-page white paper article on the two witnesses. And I will leave a link to that in the description box if you're interested in understanding or knowing who the two witnesses are, what they do, their multiple roles during the end times, and how they're associated with the temple. That's the article you want to read. Okay, so the two witnesses, they're responsible for setting up this, Tribulation Temple. And my understanding is that all the temples that are built on earth are going to reflect the heavenly temple. And I have a temple series where I actually go into the temples of God, not physically go into them, but I describe the temples of God. And this is a series I did 3 years ago now, maybe. And it's, I think it's a very good series. And I describe in greater detail what I'm going to be just sort of skipping over and giving you the bird's eye view of the temples of God. But God's temple during the tribulation is a reflection of the heavenly temple. And what do we see in the heavenly temple? We see a kingdom of priests, okay? A royal priesthood. This is after the priesthood of Melchizedek, okay? So this is like David, who was a king and like a priest went into the tabernacle of David and worshiped God in God's presence. He would actually sit in God's presence. And that's what we see the 24 elders doing in heaven. So that's the picture of what's going on in heaven. And that's going to have its reflection here on earth in the temple that's going to be built by the two witnesses. So this was a question that I asked early on is, when people are talking about rebuilding, the third temple, how do they know what to do? How do they know how God wants it? And God gives instructions for all of his temples, for the tabernacle of Moses, for Solomon's temple. And so how do people know what to do? How 1 menorah, 10 menorahs, how do they know? And so this always kind of perplexed me, but I understand the principle that the pattern is whatever we see in heaven. The earthly pattern for the temple is whatever we see in heaven. And what we see in heaven during the time of tribulation, whatever people want to call it, is the tabernacle of David. It's the priesthood of Melchizedek. It's kings and priests sitting in God's presence, and there is a golden altar of incense. So when we read about the temple in Revelation chapter 11, John's told to measure the temple, leave out the court, measure the altar, and count the people who are there. Well, he's not counting priests and Levites. He's counting the 144,000 who are going to be worshiping in something that's like the tabernacle of David. that's going to have just the ark and the golden altar of incense. It'll be in a tent, and it can be set up anywhere. There is no prerequisite for where this can be erected. But I can pretty much tell you it's not going to be on the Temple Mount. The original Tabernacle of David was set up in the city of David, probably on Mount Zion, and later on, David would have to purchase the threshing floor of Ornan to acquire the property upon which later the Solomon's Temple would be built. So we know that the Tabernacle of David wasn't on Mount Moriah, it was somewhere else. Okay, so what's going to happen is there's going to be an actual temple that God is going to be in, that his presence, his glory will rest on, and the ark will be there. I am very confident the two witnesses will know exactly where to find the ark, and this whole thing can be erected in one day. In fact, the tabernacle of Moses was set up in a day, one day for the whole tabernacle of Moses, and it was set up on the first day of the first month of Nisan, dedicated after 8 days. But we'll go into that in just a minute. Now, if you've watched some of my other videos, again, this is like drinking from a fire hose. The time period from when basically we're raptured and about 5 or 6 months later, which is when the abomination of desolation will take place. During that time period, things will be really great. There's going to be gigantic revival during that 7 days after we're changed, and we're helping to seal the 144,000, and we're ministering to people on earth, and then we're going to be caught up, and there's going to be this huge, gigantic Holy Spirit inspired revival, Joel 2 outpouring of the Spirit on all flesh. Going to be great. Well, it'll be great until it's not great anymore. And within a few months, the harlot, the powers that shouldn't be right now, okay, we're not in the time of the beast yet. We're still in the time of the harlot. And she's the one that's responsible for killing Christians. She's the one that's drunk with the blood of the saints. That's never attributed to the beast. The beast will behead whoever's left, but the harlot is drunk with the blood of the saints. So once we're gone, millions and millions and millions of people will come to the Lord, and they're going to realize that in order to win this war that we're in, this gigantic war, the plan is similar to when Christ came and he voluntarily laid down his life. He died so that he could resurrect in new life and put to naught the powers of Satan. This is going to be required of people who are come to Christ after we're gone. The 144,000, they're going to be taken in their own rapture, but everybody else who is killed for the sake of Christ, this is that great multitude we see in Revelation chapter 7. They're going to be priests to God during the millennium. They love not their life unto death. They're that same group that we see in Revelation chapter 12 who gave testimony to Christ, who were martyrs. And they were martyred before Satan was cast out of heaven. They're martyred before the beginning of the reign of the beast. And that's this huge, huge, huge crowd that nobody can number. So many people are going to die from the harlot. Now, the harlot is going to be destroyed on the same day, or almost all destroyed. Not everyone of that harlot thing, the current powers that shouldn't be, will be killed. Whatever's left is going to be killed when Christ returns. At the seventh bowl, he'll remember Babylon the Great. So by first fruits, following our rapture, here's what it's going to look like here on earth. All of the entities that are in the pit. Okay, these are ruling entities. They wear crowns. Apollyon is the king of them, and it's kind of a mirror of Christ, who is the king over the 24 elders who are sitting in the throne room of God. This is the counterfeit version. So when these beings are released from the pit, Apollyon is the one who is going to go into the beast or be joined up with the beast once the beast is killed and resurrected. Okay, then he becomes the beast who ascends from the bottomless pit, and he's the one that kills the two witnesses. I believe the two witnesses are going to be the one who kills the beast. Okay, I think they're going to be responsible for that. And the beast will be killed on Passover. And when he rises from the dead on first fruits, his first act is going to be to kill the two witnesses. Okay, that is going to be what people think is the end of the war against Christians, because the whole world will have been one giant bloodbath of killing Christians for a 10-day massacre, 10 days of great tribulation for believers. And it's a war. All the entities from the pit will be on earth at that time. Satan will have been cast out of heaven with all of his angels. That'll be on first fruits. And then God is holding back a few angels, like underneath the Euphrates, that will be released on the day of the abomination of desolation. So what that means is that Satan will have every single one of his resources here on earth. And there's going to be people who will follow him, people who will take the mark, people who will allow themselves to have one of those watchers from the pit join up inside of them as a kind of a hybrid thing. Creating the image of the beast. And remember, the beast is a hybrid person, Apollyon plus a man, and only a man can rule the earth. Even a hybrid man, I guess, is allowed to rule the earth. This is a counterfeit of Jesus, who is both God and man. So Satan has to kind of finagle to get his version of that. But there has to be a man that's ruling the earth. Those are the cosmic decrees. Those are the divine decrees from on high. And so Satan has to abide by that, and he's going to have his seed, the seed of the serpent, who is going to rule the earth. Okay, so the way it's going to look, though, is that, and this is God's divine war strategy, is weakness. Okay, believers are going to lay down their life, just like Christ laid down his life. They're going to all lay down their lives for the testimony of Jesus. And there's only going to be a few left who, for whatever reason, escaped the massacre of the harlot. And we're talking believers here. There's going to be earth dwellers, that is, people who are going to follow the beast, who are going to gladly kill Christians. This is before the beast has even begun to reign. And there's going to be other people, too, on earth. These are people who are going to be part of the sheep and goat thing when Christ returns. That is, they're people who are neither take the mark of the beast and nor are they Christians. But some of these people are actually going to help remaining believers who live on the earth after everybody else is gone. So it'll look like this. All of Satan and his evil entity buddies are going to be on the earth. God and Jesus and all the Christians are going to be in heaven, with the exception of just a few who are still on the earth. And it'll look like this, like Satan won this war against Christians, and like Christians have abandoned the planet, abandoned the earth to Satan and the Antichrist and the false prophet and so on. And the thing is, this tabernacle, the two witnesses will erect, and it's going to be abandoned. All right. When the two witnesses rise from the dead, that'll be a big surprise for everybody. And they'll watch them ascend into heaven. And at the same time, there's going to be a big earthquake. And around that exact same time, Christ is going to descend, according to Zechariah chapter 14, split the mountain, and deliver the remnant of Israel from Jerusalem. So the come out of her, my people, that we read in Revelation 18 is to that remnant of Israel to flee into the wilderness through that opening in the mountain that Jesus will create. A lot of people put Zechariah 14, Jesus stepping down on the Mount of Olives at the second coming, after Armageddon or during Armageddon, but that isn't when this happens at all. This is when Christ comes to deliver his people right at the time of the abomination of desolation. Christ is going to appear in a glorious form. Then he is going to leave the Mount of Olives. And this is highly significant because God's glory leaves from the Mount of Olives and comes back to the Mount of Olives and leaves from the Mount of Olives again. This is something he does. And God's glory in Christ is going to lead the remnant of Israel into the wilderness, and it will look like God has left, that Christ has left. He's left the temple, and for all intents and purposes, it looks like he's not coming back. Believers aren't coming back, that we're all going to heaven, and we're going to make our home in heaven as those who dwell in heaven, heaven dwellers, and the earth will be consigned to Satan and his minions. So the temple will be abandoned, and that's when the Antichrist will go in. And guess what? The false prophet has the power to make fire come down from heaven. And remember, fire coming down from heaven is how God dedicates his temples. And this is how he's done it throughout history, the tabernacle of Moses. So Moses set up the tabernacle in the wilderness. Okay, everything was all set up. And then the priests were ordained. And remember, it took 7 days for the priests to be ordained. Okay, and that's a picture of you and I who are going to be priests to God. And then on the 8th day, Aaron went into the tabernacle and began sacrificing and offering and so on and so forth. And then the glory of God came and fire came down. That's how God authenticates that this temple belongs to him and that his presence is going to be there. So the presence of God was with the tabernacle of Moses all through the wilderness wanderings. God's presence appeared in the pillar of cloud and fire over the tabernacle so the children of Israel would know when to move and when to stay encamped, because whenever the cloud moved, then they moved. And they broke down the tabernacle and they covered the ark, and the Levites took the lead and off they went. Once Joshua crossed into Canaan, into the promised land, the tabernacle of Moses was set up in a place called Shiloh. And it was in Shiloh for a long time, like hundreds of years. And all of the rituals associated with the tabernacle of Moses, all the feasts of the Lord and the daily sacrifices and so on and so forth, were all carried out by priests in the tabernacle of Moses, where it sat for hundreds of years. And then along comes, you remember Eli and Samuel. And there is a time when the Philistines were attacking Israel, and so the Israelites got this not very bright idea that they would take the ark into battle with them, and that's what they did. But it was God's plan, because he was already fed up with what was going on there. We read about that in Psalm 78, where God says, I'm done with you. And basically, God abandoned the tabernacle of Moses. So for decades afterward, the tabernacle of Moses, the priests would still go through the rituals of all the feast days and so on and so forth without the presence of God even being there. God was not there. God was not living there anymore. He got in his little chariot and he decided he was going to go on a walkabout. Okay, he was going to go traveling. It's sort of, the ark is sort of God's, it's his throne. It's also his litter. Like in ancient days, people would carry the king on a sedan or a litter. It was, he'd be on his throne being carried around by servants. And the first place God went after he left the tabernacle of Moses and basically threw up his hands and said, I'm done with you guys. You guys are horrible. And I'm paraphrasing there, he visited Ashdod and the temple of Dagon, okay, and, basically cut off the hands and cut off the power of Dagon. And so the Philistines there said, we don't want this here. And also some of them broke out in tumors. And so they sent the ark then to a place called Gath. And you remember that Goliath was from Gath. And people there got more tumors of the Philistines, and they're like, we don't want this thing here, to get it out of here. And they sent it to Ekron, and there was more tumors and more death. And so they said, you know what, we got to get this out of our country. And so they devised a plan, put an offering of gold tumors and gold mice into the ark or next to the ark, and put it on a cart with some cows. And they had this way they were going to figure out if this was, just by chance, or if the God of Israel was really kind of stronger than Dagon. And they said if the cows who had baby cows, who were going to want to nurse their baby cows, but anyway, if they kept going toward Israel, crying the whole way, then they would know that this was, God's judgment on them. And if the cows just sort of wandered around or came back or whatever, they'd know that this wasn't God. Well, anyway, the cows, they head on the road. They get to an Israelite border town called Beth Shemesh. And while the ark is there, of course, the people there are all excited that the ark is back. But somebody looks into the ark which is a big no-no, and so they're killed, and then those people don't want the ark there, and so they send it to Kiriath Jearim, and there it was there for 20 years. This is where God's presence and God's glory was in this other place. It's totally separate from Shiloh, which is where the priests are sort of going through the motions again without God ever even being there. He's not even in the tabernacle of Moses. Well, when we get to the time of David, which is, a number of years later, David decides that he wants to bring the ark to Jerusalem. So he goes to Kiriath Jearim, and he gets the ark, but he does what the Philistines did, and he put it on a cart. And of course, this was not the way it was supposed to be done, and people were killed. And David was very kind of humiliated and embarrassed because he didn't do it right, and he should have kind of known. Anyway, he decides after a few months that he's going to go back. The ark had been in the house of Obed-Edom for like 3 months, and God was blessing this guy. He wasn't killing him with tumors or anything like that. He was being blessed. And so David goes, well, I think it's safe, but we're going to have to use the Levites and put God on a litter, not stick him in a wagon. So that's what they do. David brings the ark to Jerusalem. David's dressed in a linen ephod. This is a garment of a priest, but he's the king, remember? So David is a type of Melchizedek, okay, this royal priesthood. David has a psalm that he wrote. This is where he says about Christ, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And that's the kind of priesthood that we have too, where we're a royal priesthood, we're kings and priests. Originally, God's plan for the Israelites is that they would be a kingdom of priests. Okay, they would be a kingdom of priests. That's in Exodus 19. But didn't work out quite like that. God has chosen actually us as believers to be spiritual priests over his heavenly temple, and then also to rule with Christ as kings on the earth. Okay, so David brings the ark to Mount Zion, to the city of David, which isn't Mount Moriah. It's not the temple site that we see now. And David worshiped in this tent. And then one day he says, I have this beautiful house I'm living in, and the ark of God. The ark of God is in a tent. There's something not right about this. So he told God he wanted to build a temple. And God said, you're a man of blood, can't let you do it, but your son Solomon, whose name means peace, we'll have him build this temple for me. It'll be beautiful, and I'm going to give you the plans. So David got the plans, not only for the temple and the construction of the temple and how it was supposed to look, and it didn't really look like the tabernacle of Moses at all. There's not one menorah, there's 10 of them, and it's totally different than the tabernacle of Moses. The only thing that's the same is that it's set up, with a Holy of Holies, the holy place, and then the outer courts, and it's a permanent structure, not a temporary one. Which, the fact that the tabernacle of Moses lasted for hundreds of years, as a mobile structure, sort of impressive, I think. Anyway, David gets the plans for the temple. And remember, God is going to give plans to temple builders. It's not random, okay? God has a way he wants to do this. And it's usually symbolic. So all the symbolism in the tabernacle of Moses are symbolic of Christ at his first coming. The symbolism in the Temple of Solomon are symbolic of Christ at his second coming and the millennial reign. And in between is the tabernacle of David. That's symbolic of the church of believers who are part of this royal priesthood. So rather than using the covenants to sort of put divisions in how God operates with people, the temples are a much better way of looking at this. And the temples show how God manifests himself in the world. Okay, so first it was with Christ coming in human form, which is what the tabernacle of Moses shows us. Then it's us, okay? It's us. And finally, it will be Christ as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the Prince of Peace, who is going to have this wonderful 1,000-year kingdom. Solomon's temple actually reincorporated or swallowed up the tabernacle of Moses. So the brazen altar from the tabernacle of Moses was put in storage kind of in the temple of Solomon. And the ark then was brought from Mount Zion to the temple of Solomon. God's presence came into the temple of Solomon. So first his glory filled the temple, and Solomon's praying and so on. And then fire comes down on the Day of Atonement. Okay, that's when this fire came down. And then after that, the people celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles for 8 days, and they had such a great time. They did it again. God's presence was in the Temple of Solomon for quite a while, until the people were like really going a bad way. And so God says, you know what? I'm done with this place. And he leaves the temple. His glory leaves the Temple of Solomon. And we read about that actually in the book of Ezekiel. There's a number of places that talk about the process whereby God's glory left from above the cherubim, went to the threshold of the temple door, went to the east gate, crossed over to the Mount of Olives, and then from the Mount of Olives went up into heaven. That God's glory left. He abandoned that temple. He was done with it. And then the Babylonians came in. They tore that temple down, and the Jews were taken into captivity. Well, God promised that they would be brought out of Babylon and that they would rebuild the temple. And so that happened. About 70 years later, Ezra was the priest who was kind of over the people and leading the dedication portion of the second temple. But you know what? There wasn't any ark. No ark. There was no fire that came down from heaven. There was no cloud of glory. And you can think that this would be really sad for the people, but God sent a prophet, Haggai, who said that the glory of this temple would exceed the glory of the previous temple. The glory of this temple was small and insignificant. In fact, there were people there who had seen the glory of Solomon's temple who came and saw this second temple, and they were weeping because when they saw the foundation of it, they went, well, what's this? This is nothing compared to Solomon's temple. But in Haggai, we read that the desire of all nations will come into the temple, and the latter glory would exceed the former. Years go by, and you have to remember that during that whole second temple period, people were offering sacrifices. They were performing the rituals associated with the Day of Atonement when a priest had to go into the Holy of Holies. No ark in there. They're just pouring blood on the ground. Okay, they were just going through the motions because God still wasn't in that temple yet. But that temple needed to be there because the glory of God would go into that temple. So that temple stood for, several hundred years, and then Herod came along and he embellished the second temple, and we call it Herod's temple. And it's the one that, guess who went into? Well, Jesus went into that temple. He went in as a baby, and he was dedicated there. We read about that in Luke chapter 1, verse 22. And then he went in again as a child who was 12 years old. And at 12 years old, he basically became a man. And he said he must be about his father's business. The temple was his father's. So he wasn't quite sure exactly how his mission would develop. But anyway, he went in as a 12-year-old. And then later on, in the beginning of his ministry, like right after he got a few disciples, he went into the temple and he tossed out the money changers and he overthrew their tables and he cast out the animals. Malachi talks about how the Lord would suddenly come into his temple, even the messenger of the covenant. Okay, and the word messenger there is the word angel. Okay, Jesus was the angel of the Lord. He was God's messenger who would come suddenly into his temple. So Jesus was in and out of the temple, the bulk of his ministry, and then before he was crucified, in that same period of time, in the days just prior to his crucifixion, he cleansed the temple a second time. And then he was in and out of the temple teaching prior to his crucifixion during Holy Week. And then when he was totally rejected by the chief priests and scribes, he said, "Your house is left desolate. You will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Christ is the glory of God, and he left that place. The temple became desolate, and Christ would never again go into that temple, ever again. He was killed then, he rose from the dead, and when he ascended, guess where he ascended from? It was the same place the glory of God ascended from at the time of Solomon's temple before the Babylonian captivity, when the glory of God exited Jerusalem and went up into heaven from the Mount of Olives. Right? This is where the glory of God ascends and descends from the Mount of Olives. And he's going to come back to that place again. Okay, he's going to come back to that place again. But even though Christ left from the Mount of Olives and the glory ascended from that place, the glory of God was going to come back about 10 days later. Okay, 10 days later was Pentecost, and the disciples were gathered together. There was about 120 of them, and all of a sudden, while they're praying and praising God on this Pentecost, this day of first fruits, all of a sudden there's the sound of a mighty rushing wind. And that sort of reminds me of Ezekiel chapter 1, when we hear the sound of the whirlwind, the Spirit coming down. And then there was fire that came down, and tongues of fire rested on each person. And people started speaking other languages. There's a couple of things happening here. One, the fire of God was coming down on people. That people were now going to become the little chariots of God, that he was going to live inside of us via the Holy Spirit, and his glory would be inside of us. And as we move around in the world, that he would come with us. So that's pretty cool. And the second thing is the idea that God is reversing Babel. So at the time of the Tower of Babel, people were supposed to spread out. They didn't spread out, and they were building this, horrible structure to basically poke God in the eye, and God confused the languages, and then they spread out all over the world. But what they did was they took Babel with them. They took Babylon with them, and so Babylon, Mystery Babylon, has spread over the whole earth. Okay, and that's how come the harlot sits on all the world. Okay, over all the waters. So God was going to do kind of the same thing, only this was the good version. This is with Christians. He was going to put his Spirit inside of them. They would speak other languages, and they would spread out over the whole earth. And that's what God wanted believers to do. They were to be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and finally the uttermost parts of the earth. And it actually took some persecution to get believers from stopping congregating in Jerusalem all the time to start spreading out. And then finally, when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, actually most of the Christians had left Jerusalem by that point in time. So there's a lot of layers here of symbolism. It's really very cool. But we're actually still in that period of time called the Tabernacle of David. Okay, and that's exactly what the apostles called this period of time. It's in Acts chapter 15. The Gentiles were wanting to become a part of the church, and should we make them follow the laws? Do they need to be circumcised? So on and so forth. And basically, what they figured out was, no, this is the Tabernacle of David. You don't have to follow any Mosaic laws or rituals. You can just show up and worship God. That's the temple dispensation we're in right now, where we can just be together in God's presence. That is what we see happening in Revelation chapters 4 and 5. And so for the last 2,000 years, the Tabernacle of David has been the temple, okay, that we're all in. And we as individuals are little chariots of fire that go around and spread the good news of Jesus, because we have the Holy Spirit living inside of us. In the end times, there will be an actual physical Tabernacle of David that gets erected. The 144,000 are going to worship there, just like we're going to be worshiping in heaven as kings and priests in heaven before the golden altar. They will be here on earth worshiping God in a tent where there's a the Ark of the Covenant, and there's this golden altar of incense, just like in heaven, there's that golden altar of incense. And so that's what's going to be happening. And it's going to be a time of great joy and rejoicing. This will be over the Feast of Tabernacles, when the 144,000 are sealed. Then on the 8th day, that's when we're raptured. 8th day is when the Holy Spirit comes down again on the whole earth in this big Joel 2 outpouring. And so many people get saved, the harlot decides that she needs to do something drastic, and basically that's kill all the Christians. That's what happens. Christians die. Almost all of them die. The rest are raptured. Very few people are left who are believers. The tabernacle during the tribulation time is going to be abandoned. This is when the Antichrist, the beast, will go into that tabernacle. The false prophet will cause fire to come down from heaven, as if to authenticate that the beast is the king of the earth, that he is the one. And remember, temples are throne rooms. Okay, temples are throne rooms. That the beast, the Antichrist, the man of sin, who was just killed and rose from the dead, is actually the king of the world. Okay, this is the incredible lie. And just prior to that, Satan and all of his heavenly angels, fallen angels, will have arrived on earth, and they're not going to look like nasty entities. It's all going to look very glorious. This is the great deception. This is the great deception, when all of Satan's beings, all his angels who are disguised as angels of light, and Satan himself disguised as the angel of light, gives all his power, throne, and great authority to the beast, who died on Passover and rose on first fruits, killed the 2 witnesses who seemed to be invincible. They were invincible until the 1,260th day of their ministry. And all the Christians are dead for the most part. It'll look like he's the rightful heir. He is the one who should be ruling the earth. And Satan will look like a good guy. And all the fallen angels will look like good guys. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. A year will go by, 2 years will go by, probably even 3 years will go by. And the beast will rule. It'll look like the golden age of the gods has returned. The Nephilim, okay, there'll be people like the Nephilim, hybrids. All the watchers who, sinned with women in that we read about in Genesis 6, they'll all be on the earth. And they're kings, okay? They all have golden crowns. That's what we read in Revelation 9. They look like deity. They look divine, because gold is the metal of deity. But they're not. It'll be absolutely incredible. And so several years will go by, and people will have a new normal. They'll just be living their lives. They'll be, rocking and rolling. And they will believe that the earth is theirs. And that, we divided up the realms. God and his people live in heaven. Satan and his guys, then the beast, they live on the earth. And that's the way it is. Till one day, the stars will fall from the sky. The sun will go black. The moon will turn to blood. We're not talking eclipses here. Not scheduled eclipses anyway. And the heavens will be opened up, and people are going to see the Lamb and his Father seated on the throne. They're going to see God. They're going to see Jesus. This is the sign of the Son of Man that Matthew 24 talks about. And that's when they're all going to go scurrying for their hidey holes, go underground and, want to hide from the face of God and from the Lamb. They're going to be really, really nervous. But Satan is going to have to get these people out of their hidey holes, and he does that by him and the beast and the false prophet send out 3 deceiving spirits who perform miracles, who basically encourage all these people who are hiding to gather together at Armageddon to Jerusalem because somehow or another he's going to convince them that they have to hold the earth and that they're able to do it. Anyway, you know the end of the story. Christ will return with his people, and the beast and the false prophet will be cast into the lake of fire. And all the people who sided with the beast, the earth dwellers, this is a class of people whose names are not in the book of life. All of them, anyone who's an earth dweller who follows the beast, takes the mark of the beast, worships the beast or the image of the beast, their judgment is sealed from the day they do those things. And when Christ returns, all of the fallen entities, including people, well, they're probably not even people anymore. They're something, they're some kind of altered being. All of them will be cast into the lake of fire, with the exception of Satan, who will be locked into the pit all by himself. But all the demons, all the watchers, all the fallen angels, all the people who sided with the beast will all be thrown into the lake of fire. Some of them will be thrown in alive. Some of them will be thrown in as spirits with no bodies. It doesn't matter. Whatever state they're in, they're going to go into the lake of fire. There's no great white throne resurrection for any of those people. And that's that. It's over. And that is the big judgment that takes place. It's the judgment of the fallen ones and the ones who side with the fallen ones. This is not God's judgment on an unbelieving world. It's God's judgment on fallen entities and the people who decide not to be people anymore, who decide to be part of the beast thing. And I think it's going to do something to you. If you take the mark of the beast, it's going to make you not redeemable anymore. If you worship the beast or worship the image of the beast, you're not redeemable. It's all over for you. And that's why the warning, right at the fall of Babylon, right at the time of the abomination of desolation, right at the sixth trumpet, those three angels are going to go out and warn people, do not take the mark of the beast, or you're going to be suffering in the lake of fire in the presence of God and the holy angels forever and ever. And the forever and ever there is the same forever and ever that we're going to reign with Christ forever and ever. It is forever and ever. All right. And the only people who are destined for the lake of fire, the only people who are destined for the lake of fire are people who take the mark of the beast. Prior to our generation, nobody is destined for the lake of fire. There's no destiny for the lake of fire. People, from previous generations will go into the lake of fire, but not all of them. Okay, some of them will live on the new earth, but that's a whole nother story. So God actually has a pattern of abandoning temples. The wonderful thing is he said he would never leave us or abandon us, that his presence would always be with us and be inside of us. And so that's a huge and very great encouragement to all of us, that he's always going to be with us. That is the wonderful thing. And we carry the glory of God with us wherever we go. So I realize this is a bit like drinking water from a fire hose, and I've done numerous videos where I actually go into the details of all of these things, but the main videos that are connected with what I'm sharing today, I'm going to give the links to those in the description box. So if any of this has sort of whet your appetite for learning something different or something new about God's patterns, his biblical patterns, you can look at some of those videos. And remember, prophecy is pattern. Okay, prophecy is pattern. The patterns for what is going to happen is all cyclical. It's stuff that's happened before. It's going to happen again, and it's going to maybe not look exactly the same, but the pattern will be pretty similar. We'll be able to spot how it's the same. Okay, so leave a comment in the comment section, and I just want to welcome anybody who's new to my channel. There's also links for other platforms where you can find my videos, and a website that's sort of the Reader's Digest condensed version of the things that I share on my channel. So we'll see you on another video. Till then, have a blessed day.